Have you ever felt the rush of starting something new, only to watch it fade away days later? You buy the course, you open the notebook, you tell yourself this time will be different. And then 2 weeks pass. The language app sits untouched, the book idea stays in your head, the project remains half-built. At first it feels small, just another unfinished thing. But over time, those small unfinished things begin to stack up. They sit quietly in the background of your life. Not loud, not dramatic, just present. Every time you see them, you feel a subtle weight, a quiet reminder that you started and stopped. It is not that you lack intelligence. It is not that you lack ambition. You had excitement. You had vision. You even had a plan. So what happened? Most people assume the problem is discipline or talent or timing. But the real problem is rarely the beginning. The beginning is easy. The beginning is exciting. The beginning feels like possibility. The real battle begins later in the middle. When progress slows, when the shine wears off, when the work becomes repetitive, that is the moment most dreams quietly dissolve. Not because they were impossible, but because they were abandoned. And when that pattern repeats long enough, it begins to shape your identity. You stop saying, "I am building something," and start thinking, "I am someone who never finishes." This story is about that moment, about the quiet space between starting and finishing, and about how one small shift repeated daily can change not just your results, but the way you see yourself, because the difference between a life full of ideas and a life full of completed work is not inspiration. It is learning how to stay when the excitement unleaves. That is where Marcus found himself. He was not lazy. He was not careless. In fact, he was talented. At 28, he was already known in his village for the beauty of his ideas. His hands were steady. His eye for detail was sharp. He could look at a block of wood and imagine something elegant inside it. But if you walked into his workshop, you would notice something strange. There were no finished masterpieces. Instead, you would see a chair with only 3 legs, a table frame waiting for a surface, a cabinet carefully carved but missing its doors. Every corner of the room held the outline of something that could have been great. From a distance, it looked like productivity. Up close, it was a collection of almost neighbors would stop by and ask when their orders would be ready. Marcus would smile and say, "Soon." He always believed it when he said it, because every time he started something new, he truly intended to finish. But then a better idea would appear, a new design, a more exciting challenge, something that felt fresher. The unfinished piece would be pushed aside, not abandoned in anger, just set down temporarily. And temporary slowly became permanent. His father, who had taught him the craft, would visit and quietly observe the room. He would run his hand across half-sanded wood and say a simple truth. A craftsman is measured not by how many things he begins, but by how many he completes. Marcus would nod. He agreed. He even promised himself he would change. Yet days later, he would find himself sketching something new while yesterday's work gathered dust. The pattern was subtle. There was no dramatic collapse, just a quiet cycle repeating. Excitement, progress, distraction, delay. And each time it happened, something small inside him weakened, not his skill, but his belief in himself, because talent without completion slowly turns into frustration, and a workshop full of beginnings can start to feel like evidence of personal failure. Marcus did not need more ideas. He needed to learn how to stay with one idea long enough to see it through. Then came the opportunity that should have changed everything. The mayor's daughter was getting married. She wanted something special. A hand-carved wooden chest, beautiful, unique, made by someone with vision. She chose Marcus, not because he had a long list of finished work, but because she could see his talent in the details of what he had started. She believed he could create something magnificent. And for a moment, so did he. When he accepted the commission, his heart felt light. This was not just another project. This was proof. Proof that he was capable. Proof that he was ready. For the first 2 weeks, he worked with focus and energy. The wood was carefully selected. The carvings were precise. The shape began to emerge. Visitors who stopped by nodded in admiration. They said, "This will be your masterpiece." Marcus believed them, but then won. One afternoon, he opened a design book and saw a small jewelry box, simple, elegant, quick to make. He told himself he would build it fast as a short break. Then he would return to the chest. The small project felt refreshing. Less pressure, more playful. But one small project led to another idea, then another. The wedding chest remained in the corner, not abandoned, just paused. Weeks slipped by quietly. There was always time tomorrow, until tomorrow ran out. The wedding day arrived. The bells rang in the distance, and the chest was still unfinished. No lid, no lock. Half the carvings incomplete. Another carpenter delivered a finished piece instead. Marcus did not just lose money that day. He lost trust from others and from himself. For the first time, the pattern had real consequences. And there was no one else to blame. He had the skill. He had the time. He had the opportunity. What he did not have was the habit of finishing. That evening, Marcus did not stay in the workshop. He sat on the floor, surrounded by chairs without legs, tables without tops, drawers that opened into nothing. For years he had moved past these things quickly, telling himself he would return to them, but now there was nowhere else to look. The wedding bells still echoed faintly in the distance. He realized something painful. This was not bad luck. It was not unfair timing. It was not a lack of talent. It was a pattern. He had failed in the same way, again and again, not loudly, not dramatically, but consistently. Each unfinished piece was not just wood, it was evidence. Evidence of enthusiasm that faded, of focus that wandered, of promises made to himself and quietly broken. He picked up one half-carved board and studied the details. The craftsmanship was there, the care was there, only the ending was missing. And suddenly he understood. He was not the man who built beautiful things. He was the man who almost built beautiful things. That word almost began to feel heavy, almost finished, almost successful, almost respected. It was a quiet identity forming beneath the surface. When you repeat an action long enough, it becomes a belief. And Marcus had begun to believe. He was simply someone who could not follow through, not because he said it out loud, but because his workshop said it for him. That night, he whispered something different. "I am tired of being almost." It was not a dramatic vow, not a grand speech, just a simple exhaustion, the kind that comes when you finally see the truth clearly. And sometimes that clarity is the beginning of real change. The next evening, Marcus walked to the edge of the village. There lived an older craftsman named Samuel People. Spoke of him with quiet respect, not because he talked much, but because everything he built was finished, perfectly finished. Marcus had always admired his work. Smooth edges, balanced proportions, no loose ends, no abandoned attempts hidden in corners. He knocked on the door, Samuel opened it, and studied his face for a moment. He did not ask many questions. He simply stepped aside and said, "Come in." The workshop inside was small and orderly. Every tool had its place. Every surface was clear. In the center of the room lay a simple block of wood. Marcus spoke honestly. I have ideas. I have skill. But I cannot complete what I begin. Samuel did not respond immediately. He sat down, picked up the block of wood, and began carving slowly. The sound of the blade against the grain filled the silence. After several minutes, he said quietly, "Inside this wood is a spoon right now. It is hidden. Trapped inside what it is not. My job is not to create the spoon from nothing. My job is to remove everything that is not the spoon." He shaved off a thin layer. "If I stop now, it is only damaged wood." He carved again. "If I stop halfway, it is still nothing useful." Then he looked at Marcus. "The beginning is exciting. The end is satisfying. But the middle is where most people walk away. Not because they cannot finish, but because the work becomes ordinary. Finishing is not about motivation. It is about staying long enough for the hidden shape to finally appear." Samuel placed the half-carved wood into Marcus's hands. Then he gave him something even more valuable than advice. A rule: for the next 30 days, choose one project, only one. The smallest, the simplest, the one that requires the least drama, and every single day you will touch it, even if only for 10 minutes, not when you feel inspired, not when you have extra time, every day. Even when it feels boring, even when a better idea appears, even when your mind says, "This is not enough to matter." 10 minutes is enough, because the goal is not speed, the goal is continuity. If you skip a day, you break the promise. If you chase a new idea, you restart the cycle. Marcus listened carefully. This was different from everything he had tried before. No grand plan, no pressure to be perfect, no promise of instant transformation, just one commitment, repeated daily. When he returned to his workshop that night, he did not look at the biggest project. He did not try to redeem himself with something impressive. He chose a small wooden stool that had been sitting unfinished for months. It needed sanding, a few adjustments, a final coat, nothing heroic. The next morning, before doubt could speak, he worked for 10 minutes, and then he stopped. The work was not dramatic. There was no breakthrough, no applause. But something subtle shifted. For the first time, he had kept a promise to himself. Day 2, he did the same. Day 3. When a new design idea flashed in his mind. On day 5, his hands almost reached for fresh wood. Instead, he turned back to the stool 10 minutes. He began to understand something quiet but powerful. Consistency does not feel impressive, but it builds something deeper than excitement ever could. On trust and in yourself. By the second week, something began to change. Not in the wood, in him. The stool was slowly taking shape. Edges, smoother legs, steady surface even, but the real transformation was invisible. Each day he showed up, even when it felt repetitive, even when nothing dramatic happened. Around day 12, he noticed a feeling he had not experienced in a long time. Anticipation, not the excitement of starting something new, but the quiet pull of wanting to see something through. The end was no longer abstract. He could see it forming. And with that came something deeper, respect, not from others, from himself. For years, he had judged himself based on unfinished attempts. Now he was building a different kind of evidence. Proof that he could stay on day 18. He sanded the final rough edges. On day 21, he applied the last coat. On day 23, the stool was complete. He placed it in the center of the workshop. It was simple, not revolutionary, not grand, but it was finished. He sat on it carefully. It held his weight. In that quiet moment, he felt something release. He was not broken. He was not incapable. He had simply never practiced finishing, and now he had. The completion of that small stool did more than clear space in his workshop. It rewrote the story he had been telling himself, from "I never finish" to "I can." And that shift changed everything that followed. After the stool was finished, Marcus did not celebrate loudly. He did something much simpler. He chose the next project. Not the biggest, not the most impressive, just the next unfinished piece within reach. And he applied the same rule. Touch it every day. No exceptions. At first, it felt almost too ordinary to matter. 10 minutes of sanding, 10 minutes of measuring, 10 minutes of quiet repetition. But something unexpected began to happen, momentum. Because finishing one project had changed his identity in a small but powerful way. He was no longer trying to prove he could finish. He already had. The second project was completed faster, the third felt lighter. Not because the work was easier, but because the doubt was weaker. Weeks passed. The workshop slowly transformed. Corners that once held abandoned frames were now filled with completed. Furniture surfaces once covered in dust were clear. Each finished piece stood as quiet evidence. Commitment works. 6 months later, the space looked different. Not perfect, not dramatic, but consistent. The mayor's daughter returned one afternoon. She had heard that Marcus was no longer the man who almost finished. She asked if he could build the wedding chest again. This time for an anniversary, Marcus did not rush to promise. He simply said yes, because now he understood something he never had before. Finishing is not a burst of inspiration. It is a system, and systems can be trusted. Marcus's transformation was not magic. It was not luck, not talent, not a sudden surge of discipline. It was built on a few simple truths that anyone can practice. The first truth is this: the middle is always the hardest part, and the beginning feels alive. New ideas, fresh energy, possibility. The ending feels rewarding. Relief, pride, results. But the middle feels ordinary. Progress slows, doubt gets louder, distractions look more exciting. Most people interpret that discomfort as a sign to stop. It is not. It is a sign that you are exactly where growth happens. The second truth is simple. Finished beats perfect. A completed simple project builds confidence. An unfinished perfect idea builds frustration. Perfection promises validation. Completion builds identity. And identity is stronger than motivation. The third truth is the most practical: touch it. Daily, even for 10 minutes. Consistency may look small, but it compounds. Each day you return, you reinforce a message. I keep my word. Over time, that message becomes belief, and belief becomes behavior. Marcus did not become extraordinary overnight. He became consistent, and consistency quietly reshaped his life. What worked for him was not complex, it was repeatable. And that is what makes it powerful. In the end, this story is not really about wood or furniture. It is about identity. For years, Marcus believed he was someone who struggled with follow-through, not because he declared it, but because his actions repeated the same pattern. Start, feel excited, lose focus, move on. When you repeat that cycle long enough, it becomes a quiet label. This is just who I am. But identity is not fixed. It is built from evidence. Every action you repeat becomes proof. When Marcus finished that first small stool, he created new proof. Not that he was perfect, not that he was suddenly disciplined, but that he could stay. And staying changed everything. Because once you finish one thing, you cannot honestly tell yourself you are incapable. You may still feel distracted. You may still feel resistance. but you have evidence that you can continue. That is how change, really, happens, not through dramatic declarations, not through waiting for motivation, but through small promises kept daily. So look around your life. Find one unfinished thing, the smallest one. Do not try to fix everything at once. Just begin again, and this time. Stay, because the moment you finish something simple, you are no longer someone who almost did it. You are someone who did. And that shift in identity is where real transformation begins.